Woohoo! Hello everyone, this is PirateMageTjalf with a long overdue Space Wolves painting tutorial. This is the mini I'll be painting. It counts as Blade Guard Veteran Sergeant for my kill team. Before we start, be advised that this is an incomplete video. After discussing the matter with some fellow painters, I decided against doing faces and bases in this video. The base is covered in another tutorial, while the face, or skin in general, will be a part of a future video, likewise freehands. Honestly, faces may take up so much time and attention to detail, I just don't want to upload a half-hour plus video. Let's jump right in, shall we? I started by priming the entire mini with the Army Painter Wolf Grey Spray Primer for a nice and even coat, but you can of course also use an airbrush. The first step revolves around painting the shadows for the power armor. I used a watered down mix of Vallejo model color German Camo Black Brown and Army Painter Wolf Grey. Just paint them wherever light won't reach, and also everywhere armor plates interlock. Just use it like you would use a wash, and don't worry about mistakes. The paint will also help make the ornaments look a little more three-dimensional. Do yourself a favor and paint the wolf pelt with the leftover mix. It will help the actual base paint for the fur stick better later on, and with fewer layers. The title of this chapter is a little deceiving, because we'll start off with correcting all the little mistakes from the previous step. We could have painted a little more careful then, but trust me, shading carefully takes much more time than shading like a 3-year-old and then cleaning up the mess. And now we're starting with the actual highlights. I used a mix of equal parts Wolf Grey and Army Painter Voidshield Blue, watered down as usual, and painted them everywhere light would hit. Well, to be precise, I'm not really attempting to go for accurate lighting. Instead, I'm applying the mix wherever it supports a general idea of light. Next step, an additional part of white has been mixed into the paint from the previous step. Instead of a general broad stroke, I'm now going for edge highlighting. I'm not going to highlight everything, just everything that stands out. Since the paint has been diluted considerably, a second coat here and there does wonders. Some exceptions to the everything that stands out rule, like the vents on the breastplate, are highlighted anyway just to create additional depth. Make sure to paint the gauntlet segments most carefully, as this will contribute significantly to the impression of a power armor that might actually work. bright yellow shoulder pads and its contrast against the ice blue armor was what has actually drawn me to the Space Wolves. Unfortunately, yellow can be a bit of a pain in the armor. Yeah, that's why we have to build it up slowly. I'm beginning with an undercoat of Vallejo model color orange-brown. Since the model has been primed blue, it'll take a thin coat or two before you can start with the actual yellow. I know this has become something of a meme lately, but really, thin down your paints. This is especially important when you're working on rounded shapes, and be patient between two layers. If they're too wet, you'll take off paint where it was supposed to stick. You can of course use wet blending, but since you're watching this tutorial, I guess it's rather safe to assume that you, like me, haven't yet mastered this technique. After the base coat of orange-brown has dried, I'm adding some Vallejo Game Color Sun Yellow to it to roughly equal parts, and then I start painting it on the shoulder pad. Notice how I'm leaving a tiny dark gap between the trim and the rest of the surface. This helps me create depth. Once this coat is done, I'm going for the next coat, which is pure Sun Yellow. This time, I start leaving out the area overshadowed by the backpack. This is followed immediately by another layer of pure Sun Yellow. Before the next step, I'm mixing a little army painter Daemonic yellow into my Sun Yellow. And because I'm always nervous when filming a painting video, I immediately make the stupid mistake of painting the entire shoulder pad. Don't do this at home, kids. The next two steps basically just add some more Daemonic yellow. This time, I'm tracing the shape of the shoulder pad, so the rounded part of the top is also the brightest. This is where the light would fall on. By tracing the shape of the pad, I'm using a technique vaguely resemblant of volumetric shading. There's dozens of great videos on volumetric shading on YouTube, but I'm afraid that I, without formal artist training, could only copy and paste whatever I find on the internet, so I'm not going to discuss that any further. Finally, I'm adding some white to the mix to draw a thin line parallel to the trim, a relic from my edge highlighting heavy days. Metal! Excuse me, this must be my Viking heritage, which I don't have. So, yeah, let's go. Metal can be annoying to paint. If you, like me, tend to overthink things, you will have a hard time. If you're keeping it simple though, metal can actually be fun. I'm beginning by base coating everything that's supposed to be made of steel with Citadel contrast black Templar. Every regular black paint would work too, but this way, I think it just flows better. Even the teeth of a chainsword are primed relatively quickly with the awesome flow of contrast paints. My backpacks are always silver at the bottom and the color of the rest of the Space Marine armor at the top, so I'm base coating this part too. I'm also priming the joint areas between the armor plates with black Templar, just like the company insignia. The latter will be explained later. After a few minutes, our freshly blacked areas will have dried and we can start painting them silver. I'm using Vallejo Metal Color Silver, one of my favorite colors. Shout out to my best man, the Banana Seal, at this point, because he gave me this awesome paint for Christmas. I've never had any better metal color. Most of the metal areas can be quickly brushed over in this phase. Just make sure you're not hitting anything you've painted before. Well, I tend to paint on the shoulder pads at this point. That's why the right pad looks a little different later in the video. Right thereafter, I'm using Citadel Agrax Earthshade to dye the metal an oily brown. I've long refused to use washes at all because I was too proud and thought this was the easy mode. Guys, don't make that stupid mistake. It's what you do with your colors and not what colors you use that makes you a, inverted commas, good painter. And we're going further down the quick and easy route by painting all the areas that are supposed to be metal with a diluted mix of black Templar. This will bring out the contrast between the dark and the lighter parts. Finally, after a small drying period, we're edge highlighting the metal with silver. With the darkened parts as the background, these highlights will stand out like a flashlight in the dark. Make sure to highlight the chainsword's teeth individually rather than by brushing over it, because if you slip while brushing, you might have to do the shading again. And we don't want that extra work, do we? Starting with a mix of 50-50 Army Painter Oak Brown and Army Painter Dragon Red, I'm painting a base coat for the red belt. Come to think of it, I should have treated this as leather, but, well, stupid mistakes happen, right? Immediately after the base coat, I'm painting a layer of pure Dragon Red, which goes everywhere but the lowest areas or recesses. A layer of 50-50 Dragon Red and Army Painter Pure Red will form the first layer of highlights. And to finish this off, I'm adding a tiny bit of white to the mix for a subtle highlight, just below the metal trim. Ah, gold, the metal of kings! I remember how I first learned that steel should always be painted upon a black base coat to achieve the best results. As a teenager, I then concluded that gold, being an, well, entirely different color, should be painted upon a white base coat. Oh boy, stupid teenage me. In my opinion, the best base coat for gold is brown. That's why I'm using oak brown. It has the beautiful, saturated, warm tone I want for my gold. Just prime all the areas you want to be gold with oak brown. You might have to use 2 thin coats, but trust me, it's worth the time. And right after the oak brown has dried, bring out the actual metal. I use Army Painter Greedy Gold because it's a rich and shiny color that can easily be, inverted commas, converted into other yellowish and even reddish metals. Just paint over everything you've primed before. The next step is to apply a purple wash to enhance the contrast. I use an old Citadel Leviathan purple, but really any purple wash will do. visually combine the trim's gold and the shoulder pads yellow, you can paint a thin line of wash into the recesses. Since we perceive both colors as yellow-ish, the wash will help our brain see both components as parts of a single object, all without turning everything into a muddy blob. After the wash has dried, add a little silver to the greedy gold and use the mix to highlight all the edges and studs. A thin edge highlight will do. Don't use too much silver though, because that stuff is strong and will easily turn your gold into what you might perceive as pure silver. A final highlight of pure silver on the highest edges will make your metal shine. And I'm not showing you this because I just forgot to tape it. Don't ask, I'm stupid. Back when we worked on the steel, I told you that I would also do a black Templar base coat on all the insignia. The reason for this is that it helps the actual color stick better. And let's assume that I followed my own advice. So the first actual coat for the black of the insignia is a mix of equal parts Black Templar and Army Painter Necromancer Cloak. This will go everywhere but the recesses, so don't paint the wolf's eyes grey. The next step is a quick edge highlight, using a mix of the previous paint and some white. You don't have to be too careful, but make sure it doesn't just flow anywhere it's not supposed to go. Another highlight with a little more white in the mix will help bring out the details of the sculpt. And finally, we're doing a fine edge highlight with a mix of the previous color and yet more white. This time, be careful to only highlight the highest and most visible edges. Metal, leather, this starts to look like an ad for a heavy metal band. Begin by base coating the leather with German Camo Black Brown. The next step will be to paint the shadowed areas with a mix of equal parts Black Templar and German Camo Black Brown. The contrast paint helps improve the flow, so shadows are easier to paint. After a few touch-ups with pure German Camo Black Brown, I hate pronouncing this paint's name, add some Army Painter mummy robes to German Camo Black Brown and go for a slightly irregular edge highlight. You can just stipple it on, as this will create an impression of used leather. Remember when I said I should have painted the red belt as leather? That's why. And a final highlight of yet more mummy brown in the mix, again stippled on, will result in used and worn leather. Some thin line casually painted on will support that impression. In the beginning, I advised you to paint the wolf pelt with the armor's leftover shadow color. It helps the actual base coat stick, because this way you'll need fewer coats. And of course, yes, it's German Camo Black Brown again. Don't forget to add some paint to the underside of the pelt. Once everything has dried, I'm dry brushing the fur with Army Painter Monster Brown. Because the overall structure of the fur isn't necessarily dry brush friendly, the next step is to mix some mummy brown into the monster brown, and I'm highlighting single strands of fur. And one more highlight, this time with pure mummy brown, painted everywhere but in the shadowy areas, and this will finish the fur. beginning with a base coat of Army Painter Leather Brown and Army Painter Desert Yellow, painting it all over the teeth and claws. For the next step, I'm using a pure Desert Yellow. In classic heavy metal fashion, I'm drawing lines across the length of the claws. They intersect near the tip and, at the widest part, leave some of the base coat visible. And then I'm doing the very same thing again, but with thinner lines and a mix of equal parts Mummy Brown and Desert Yellow. And exactly the same thing again, but with yet thinner lines and a little more Mummy Brown into the mix. After one more step with yet thinner lines and pure Mummy Brown, and voila, we're done! This is the finished Blade Guard Veteran, which unfortunately won't have rules in the new Kill Team starter set that was announced this weekend, meaning that I'll have to stick with the first edition rule set for now. Speaking of which, what's your favorite Kill Team unit and why? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you next time!